Gar Borras, and welcome to episode 42 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. And Gar, today we're going to be talking all about one of the greatest classic TV game shows of all time. That's right, Gar, I'm talking all about It's the Family Feud. Now, Gar, what are your memories from that classic game show?
Survey says.
There you go. Beep. Buzz. Yeah.
I was watching the show way back in the 70s
when
Richard Dawson was doing the show. And,
sure.
And I remember, he had that thing that he did that actually it became kind of part of the show. It was almost like a catchphrase, but it wasn't something he would say. It was
something he would. Yeah. In fact, I will say I've been a fan of Family Feud since, like you, back in the 70s. Had a huge part to do with my age, but I'll tell you, Richard Dawson remains, not just because he's the original host, my all-time favorite Family Feud host, but I think it's because, like you're saying, he had that it factor.
Well, they knew it from the Match Game, which was the show that he was a regular on before he got the gig as the host.
Sure.
And the only thing that I remember about the Match Game was his last name was Rayburn.
Okay.
And he had that microphone that was like this long stem with a little round ball at the end of it.
Yeah.
And it was the weirdest looking microphone, but that was part of that game show host, his whole vibe to the show.
Yeah.
That was part of it. It was that microphone. But Gene Rayburn, that's
it. Yeah, Gene Rayburn. There you go.
And so Richard Dawson was like a regular on there, and he was so popular as a guest on the show that it was just a given that the next step for him was to give him the mic and let him be the host. But honestly, I really have to be honest about that.
Yeah.
The Family Feud was the perfect vehicle at that time.
Oh, sure.
For him, because I think if he would have done a different a game show, I'm not quite sure if that same catching lightning in a bottle would have happened.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Because it's the answers that's the actual star of the show.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's the thing.
Because that is the wild card. That is the thing that is like completely out of control, because nobody has any idea what is going to pop in that person's head, and they're going to blurt out as the answer, because you have the fact that the person is being put on the spot on TV, which is the biggest spotlight you could ever imagine.
Oh, sure, yeah.
For a regular civilian, you know what I mean, that doesn't do this, put them on a show and put them right there in front of the camera, and they've never been there before, and they've never done that before, and they got to come up with the winning answer. I mean, that's so much pressure, but it's magical because the answers were priceless.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Yeah, you're so right.
I mean, I was watching in preparing for this episode, The Time Machine. I was watching episodes and I was dying laughing.
Yes, and see,
I was literally on
the floor.
It was so funny. The crazy answers. Where in the heck did you come up with that for an answer?
Yeah.
That's what America is. That's what's going through America's mind when they're watching it. It's just a whole thing that just worked.
Yeah, and Gar, you're so right about that, because the thing is, a show like The Family Feud is not one you can script for that very reason. I mean, they can kind of script maybe what the host says, but a lot of what he says too is kind of off the cuff, and that's part of his charm and why he's there.
Well, I think they discovered that because Richard Dawson was doing a much lighter version of what Steve Harvey does. And basically reacting to the answer, the hilarity of the answer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there were times that, even back in the 70s, that Richard Dawson, because the answer was just so far out of left field. I mean, so it's not out of left field. It was out of the parking lot behind left field.
And Gar, let me ask you.
Far.
Even in prepping for the show last night and watching these old episodes that you said you did, I'm willing to bet, when I was a kid, I remember watching the show, and even last night myself prepping for the show, watching some of these old episodes that I found online. You also, I remember being at home watching it on the tube and be like, oh, I can't believe that guy said that. Or when they ask the question, I try to think, I'd shout out an answer myself. Okay, if I was on that show, I would say, this is the answer. And even as an audience member at home, watching on the TV, you're taking part in the show,
Well, yeah. And the thing is, though, is it's easy when you're sitting at home
Yeah.
chair to come up with the answer and go, well, I would have. Well, you got the time.
Yeah.
They're under the spotlight, and they got no time, and they got to come up with that answer right now.
Yeah, and then
you know what I mean?
And there's part of it where
and it's just so magical what comes out of these people's mouths. It's magical.
And then what's interesting in watching it is there's a certain people, the contestants on the show, that they really think hard and they're really worried about coming up with, the number one answer. But then there are some contestants that care more about coming up with with a funny line or, I'm going to kind of say something off the wall just to, get a response.
Well, Richard Dawson, when somebody would make an answer, or guess at an answer, and it's way out of left field. His reaction was always good answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he would say it in a sarcastic way. He would mean it in a sarcastic way because it was a horrifically bad. It's a losing answer.
I found it.
Richard Dawson would always, reply with that sarcastic "good answer," kind of thing. But Steve Harvey, had the genius to embellish on that. And so what Steve Harvey would do is it was his reaction. So now you're doubling up on the funny because you got a hilarious answer that everybody in America is scratching their head. Where did you come up with that answer? And then you're doubling up on it because now you've got Steve Harvey, because he's a great ad-libbing comedian. He can take that and ad-lib, and that's part of the beauty of him being on the show. The host of the show is he has this incredible ability of ad-libbing that just adds more hilarity to an already hilarious answer.
And part of his success with that is why people react to it the way they do is because when he does it, he's so good at ad-libbing, as you say, but it doesn't come across as thought out or scripted. It comes across as a natural reaction somebody would have,
Yes, and it's really. I mean, when I was watching the show, because that's really where doing the research for this, all of this really opened up. Is actually watching, I went on YouTube and, or I went online and there was this one that the Today Show put the 7 hilarious moments, most hilarious moments. All 7 of them were hilarious. I was dying. Laughing. It was so funny. And some of them were Richard Dawson ones, and some of them were, Steve Harvey. And really, those are, of all the hosts
those are the two
that have hosted Family Feud, both of those guys are, they're icons of the show, and they both had the longest tenures. Now, I think Steve Harvey is been on the show longer, but he hasn't quite done as many episodes.
Yes, that's what I was reading.
As Richard Dawson, but he's even closing in on that now.
Yeah, that's what I was reading.
So he Steve Harvey there's going to be a point where he's going to wind up starting to overshadow Richard Dawson. But you really have to appreciate, the groundwork that Richard Dawson laid out for everyone else to follow.
Oh, sure.
Because if Richard Dawson wasn't as great at doing the show as he was, you wouldn't have all the success that has lasted all of these years since.
You wouldn't have had a show that's been on the air for 23 years. I mean, 23 seasons. That's one of the longest running.
23 seasons, yeah. It's crazy.
Now
game shows do like episodes, an episode airs every day.
Yeah, and you got to remember,
this is not a season of, where nowadays when they do a season for a TV show, it's like 5 or 6 episodes. A long season is 10 or 12 episodes.
Sure.
That's considered long nowadays. But a game show is like they do so many episodes that they literally put out an episode every day.
Yeah,
with the exception of the weekends.
Yeah, and you got to remember that the Family Feud predates, Jeopardy, predates the Wheel of Fortune, and I think the only other game show that's been on longer has got to be The Price is Right, which we also did an episode on. Now, Gar, let's get into the some of the history of the Family Feud, just to help people realize the time frame we're talking. Family Feud is an American television game show which was created by American TV producer Mark Goodson. The Family Feuds first premiered on ABC on July 12th, 1976, with host Richard Dawson, as we said, which he had previously kind of been promised a gig by Mark Goodson, like you said, when he appeared as a panelist for a long time on The Match Game. He was kind of promised that, okay, next time Mark Goodson, created a game show, that he would be the host. And come to find out that Richard Dawson was reading the trades and found out that Goodson was working on this new game show, the Family Feud, and he had not been offered the gig as promised. They originally had wanted William Shatner from Star Trek, because Star Trek had long been off air at that point in 1976. They wanted him to originally host the show, but Richard Dawson got wind of this, and he threatened legal action. Hey, you promised me next time you developed a show that I'd at least get an audition. That's ultimately how he got to audition for the show.
Well, and obviously, it's weird because when you take yourself back in time to like the mid '70s when they're when the show's in development and it's all being talked about and you know what I mean, you look at a guy like William Shatner, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, when you're looking back now, and you see the success, the Richard Dawson, it's really hard for me to mentally digest William Shatner having that same kind of catching lightning in the bottle, because it's I think I've already even said it in this episode. It's that
it factor, that
unpredictable comedic part of the show that separated that show from all of the others, because all of the other game shows that you were talking about that were that have superseded it and everything, that's you wouldn't have those other game shows, but none of those game shows have that element that makes you like die laughing on the floor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're entertaining because they exercise your mind, because it's fun to sit at home and try to guess the answer.
Sure.
That has always been the popularity of a game show. But Family Feud uncovered, and I honestly, I think they discovered it. I don't think that it was a pre-planned thing. I think they discovered it and decided to embellish on it.
Yeah.
But that comedic element, that catching lightning in a bottle, that unpredictable element of people blurting things out and having the possibility of it being absolutely hilarious, it does not exist on any other game show.
Yeah, and unlike like on Jeopardy or a game show like that, what's cool about the Family Feud is it's not necessarily about the right answer. It's about the most popular answer. I mean, for example, they have all these sites that list like different, Family Feud questions that have been asked on the show over the years. And I was reading that the very first question that they ever asked on the first episode of the Family Feud was, can you name a famous George? Again, you hear a question like that. Well, I don't know. What do they want to know? A famous George? What is that? It gets you kind of thinking, and you say, okay, we asked 100 people. Oh my God. So what's the number one answer that 100 people gave? And of course, the most popular answer at that time was George Washington.
He is the most famous George.
At that time, yeah.
And that's the beauty of the show it's so different from the other game shows. I mean, it's just like so different. And that element of having to guess what that popular answer is, it's just
mind-boggling. Yeah.
It's mind-boggling and magical at the same time. And before we started talking about this, this episode, I was mentioning to you that after watching these episodes and dying laughing, I'm going to start watching this show again. It's too funny.
Me too.
It's still as funny as ever.
Yeah, I was watching some of the old Richard Dawson episodes like you, and it's funny because none of these shows, they're not really dated. They're as funny as ever, and that's the important thing in watching a show like this. And talking a little more about Richard Dawson, I was reading how he ultimately got the gig, is he kind of threatened Mark Goodson that, look, hey, not only had I better get an audition, but if you don't give me that, if you don't allow me to be the host of a new Family Feud show you've just created, I'll tell you what, I'll continue to do the match game, but I'm not going to be funny. I'm gonna purposely go out of my way, to tell stinky jokes. Yeah, and that must have did it. And so ultimately, I guess once they started the Family Feud, they eventually seen the magic that he was.
Well, yeah. Yes, in hindsight, he's a much better choice than William Shatner.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing to say for me to say, because we're talking about William Shatner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's iconic.
Yeah.
Even today, without him getting that gig on that game show, his iconic status still overshadows Richard Dawson. But
yeah, and
when you say that the choice between William Shatner, Richard Dawson was the right choice.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I think there was really kind of a question about Richard Dawson at the time because. If you look at what he'd done before, okay, obviously the match game, and then much to my surprise, thanks to the fact we have TV Land and Antenna TV and all these retro TV stations. Prior, the very first thing that he's really known for was appearing as on Hogan's Hero, which was like a comedy that was on like in the 60s, I think, or maybe even the 50s. About being in the military.
60s. That was that was where I first
Found him.
Saw Richard Dawson. He was, he wasn't like the main star.
Character, but
that was, I know his last name's Roger Crane or Bill Crane.
Yeah. Okay.
But he was the star of the show, and Richard Dawson was the side character, but he was still, a prominent part of Hogan's Heroes, and, to the point where I knew
who he was,
who Richard Dawson was before he ever got the gig on Family Feud. And he actually had a long stand-up comedy and film career before he ever got the gig as the game show host. So even when you eliminate Family Feud from his resume, he still has a resume that to be highly regarded.
And then there's a certain number of people out there, Gar, just because of their age, that the only thing they know of Richard Dawson, a lot of people just think of Family Feud, but like you said, for a little bit, people a little bit older, they realize, no, Hogan's Hero came before,
Yeah, it was early '60s, and it wasn't until I think the first episode of Family Feud aired in like '76.
Yeah, that's what.
So that's a 12-year span.
Yeah.
Between Hogan's Heroes and that. So, it kind of gives you a better scope of his career. It's a long career before he ever did Family Feud.
Yeah, and
and it's a very successful career.
Oh, sure.
Because Hogan's Heroes was a
huge hit.
Very, very popular TV show, and all of the other TV shows that he did too. He was on the Dick Van Dyke Show. He was on. People don't know it, but back in the early '60s, Jack Benny was like super popular.
Oh, sure.
TV show. I mean, a super popular TV show. He was on the Jack Benny Show. He got one of my favorite shows that I used to like to watch when I was a kid, The Outer Limits.
Oh, yes.
I used to love both Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. And I even used to like Alfred Hitchcock. That, it really, back in the 60s, those are the big three. It was Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and Alfred Hitchcock Hour.
Oh, yeah.
And those are all shows that he was on before
the Family Feud.
He was even on Hogan's Heroes.
Oh, see? So, yeah, I wasn't even aware of that. Wow. That's why we love doing the show with you, Gar. You can give us that extra, little bit of information that we might not otherwise have. And, of course, the Family Feud features two competing families who compete against one another to name the most popular answers to survey questions to win cash and prizes. And Richard Dawson's on-air personality can be kind of described as a cross between Wink Martindale and Chuck Barris. Dawson hosted the show until 1988, when Dawson was replaced by another comedian named Ray Combs.
Oh, that's kind of a dark time for the show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's so weird because I kind of dropped off at that time. I was no longer watching the show.
Yeah.
But still aware of it.
Yeah.
And everything. But for some reason, it wasn't like I turned my nose up to this Combs guy, but all of America did, because the ratings were just taking a nosedive when he took over the show. It was just such a drastic opposite change, between him and Richard Dawson. It was just too much of a drastic difference, and it didn't have. I don't think that Combs quite had the ability to improvise like Richard Dawson and Steve Harvey, because those are the kings of
the Family Feud,
improvising on the show, and he wound up getting fired.
Yeah.
His life wound up going on just this horrible downward spiral.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
To the point to, where he wound up committing suicide.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little more in detail later on in today's episode. But Gar, I think part of it too is like me and a lot of people that grew up on the Family Feud. It's a couple things. I mean, number one, it's kind of like when your favorite band changes lead singers, and as great as a new singer may be, it's that familiarity of the band, that you grew up with. The singer that you loved, he was on the records that you bought, that you grew up on. Also, there's the fact that Gar Borras yourself, I'm sure you were a young man at the time, thinking about much other important things in your life and the Family Feud. And I think, again, the familiarity. I know, I was still aware the show was on there, but I didn't tune into it as much just because, Richard Dawson is no longer a host. And there's a certain part of the Family Feud audience that was like this. Now, again, getting a little more into Richard Dawson, this is the part of the show I know you're going to really love talking about. Throughout Richard Dawson's time on Family Feud, his trademark became his famous kiss. Dawson showed affection and was very friendly to all the female contestants on the show, which caused a lot of controversy. Behind the scenes, the producers and the network brass were not really too happy about it. So that's kind of, but again, when we think of Richard Dawson, I remember watching old episodes with my grandmother and my grandfather. And that's the thing. But that's the kissing guy. That he's famous for the kiss, and and so much so that Richard Dawson he was getting so much pressure from the people behind the scenes, and he actually asked the audience, "Okay, you know what I want you guys to do? They're telling me that I shouldn't do the famous kiss, and I want to know how you people feel about it." And over 20,000 people wrote in saying they favored the famous kiss.
Well, it's kind of hard to. Because you're talking about fans, so it's not an objective vote.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know how reliable taking that as something to hang your hat on. That says that this is all right, because many years later, it's something like that is
frowned upon.
Considered infringing on a personal space.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of frowned upon.
It's an uncomfortable infringing on personal space. And back in the 70s, that was something that women felt. That personal space was invaded, but because it was a male-dominant world, it wasn't a situation where women felt that they could feel comfortable about voicing
an opinion.
that they were uncomfortable with someone invading their personal space. And so I think that's it was something that you take it back in the 70s, and there were people that were voicing that they were uncomfortable with that invasion of personal space, but that voicing that was actually people didn't feel that they could openly voice that.
Yeah.
If they did voice that, there would be backlash.
Yeah, and it's interesting because
and so the truth is when I was watching it and I was seeing it, I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I could see, where, and this is back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it was just my own personal observation. I was one of those people that was like actually watching it, and it wasn't this huge deal.
No.
But personally, to me, I felt, hey man, that looks a little bit
crossing the line. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you're doing that with a complete stranger.
Yeah, and here's
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's usually when you're doing something like that, when you're doing a kiss, it's someone that you actually know.
Yeah. And here,
that you feel that that now when you're doing it with somebody that you have a personal connection with, that it's already known that that's an acceptable thing to do. That's fine. But when you're doing something like that with a complete stranger, that none of that has been established.
Yeah, and again,
I just feel that nowadays people feel less pressure to now that they feel
emboldened
and voice, hey, wait a minute, you're invading my personal space. So people are voicing that now because they don't have that pressure of it being squashed, or they don't have the pressure of the backlash like they used to do back in the 70s. I have to be honest with you. I was watching the show and I like the show, and I don't have anything against Richard Dawson. No. But I did see it that way.
And it's a very complex situation because, as we've just kind of described here, the times were very different. Things were much more accepted. I mean, even in this case, I mean, you look at the fact, okay, they had a campaign where he asked the audience to write in and they gave their opinion. And I guess eventually the network brass allowed Dawson to continue with it because it became his trademark. It became, I mean, all these years later, talking about Richard Dawson and Family Feud, it's a thing he became known for. It became his trademark. So much that they started calling him the Kissing Bandit. And you're so right, Gar. If Richard Dawson was still on the air today doing that, he would be he would be canceled.
They'd be like acceptable behavior now.
He'd be canceled. He'd be like, you pervert. How could they air that on TV?
Well, I think that's taking it a little extreme.
No, but I mean, the world's a different place.
The real difference what the real difference is back in the 70s, it was a male-dominated world.
You're right.
And if females voiced that they were uncomfortable with something like that, they had to. Women understood in the 70s that there was going to be backlash and there was going to be a price that women were going to have to pay for voicing that they didn't like someone invading their personal space. Fast forward to now that has been lifted, and now people can voice that they are uncomfortable with somebody invading their personal space, and now because people are being held accountable for their actions, where back in the mid 70s, people those same people were not being held accountable for their actions. Now women feel that their voice can actually be heard.
Yeah, and the world has changed all these years later so much, Garvin. You remember when we did our episode on I Love Lucy and Lucille Ball, that we were talking about predating I Love Lucy. She was on the radio. She had this show called My Favorite Husband, and part of the reason they called it My Favorite Husband as opposed to something like the Lucy Show or something like that was because of the fact that back in the 50s on radio and TV, they could never have anybody thinking that a woman was the star of the show. So
it was a male-dominated world. And that truly is the biggest difference between the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and now. Yeah.
And okay, now Gar, we talked a good deal about Richard Dawson, which was a huge part of his show. I mean, he's still my favorite host, as I said. But let's talk a little bit about the man who replaced him, Ray Combs. It said in 1988, comedian Ray Combs took over the hosting duties for Family Feud, replacing Richard Dawson. And Combs heard the show from 1988. Oh, he hosted the show. I'm sorry, from 1988 to 1993. And again, like you said, he was not as popular. people like missed having Richard Dawson, and it's kind of. I learned a little more about Ray Combs than what I initially known. Apparently, that the way he was discovered, I guess he was very big on the improv stand-up comedian circuit, and at the time, and so much to the point that he eventually got hired by NBC to do like I don't know if you've ever seen a TV taping, but usually we have a comedian that comes on beforehand and warns the audience up, tell when the actors come out, we want you guys to laugh and everything, and he was doing that for a while. He was doing warming up audiences for like shows on the Golden Girls, Amen, and I think The Facts of Life I read.
Well, obviously, the producers, saw something in him, but then again, these higher ups, that work in the offices think that they can look at the data and all that kind of stuff, and then and take all the risk out of it and everything like that, and make the right decisions and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden they put somebody on there, and then all that stuff turns out to be wrong. You take all this data and everything says that this is the right decision, and then when you actually put everything out there, and when all is said and done, it doesn't work. You just cannot predict what the American public is going to gravitate towards. If there are some people that make that decision right more than others, and those are the people that have more success. But even those people that have more success, they can't make the right decision every time.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's the wrong decision.
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that if you look at Richard Dawson's history prior to Family Feud, he had experience in the entertainment industry. He'd done Hogan's Hero, he'd done The Match Game. And this guy Ray Combs, I was reading, he was originally an Indianapolis furniture salesman, and he decided one day. Actually, what he'd done is he had written a letter because he was a huge fan of David Letterman. So he wrote a letter to David Letterman telling him a story about how he wanted to be a famous comedian like him, and Letterman wrote an encouraging letter back to him and said, well, stick with it, Ray, and hopefully your dream will come true. And so once he received that letter from Letterman, it encouraged him, okay, I'm going to quit my job as a furniture salesman, and I'm going to move my family to Los Angeles, and I'm going to start doing whatever I have to break into the comedy world.
It's so hard to be successful in the entertainment business. To this day, still, the cream rises to the top.
Yeah.
And it really is extreme, whether you want to be successful as a game show host or a musician or an actor or an actress, whatever it is that you want to do in the entertainment business, it is so hard to be successful, and there is no formula. If you do this and you do this and you do this and you do this, you're going to be successful. There is no formula. It's really
luck of the draw.
Back to what I said earlier in this episode, it's really being successful is kind of like catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, and then it said one day while Combs was at NBC warming up an audience for the Golden Girls, Johnny Carson heard all the people laughing at Ray Combs' routine, and he went and inquired what were all those people laughing at. I guess he was in a completely different studio, but the laughter was so loud he heard it, and he found out it was this comedian Ray Combs. So at that point, he invites him to come on an episode of The Tonight Show, and much to Johnny's delight, when he came on The Tonight Show, he received a standing ovation. And again, this is before Ray Combs has ever appeared on The Family Feud.
Yeah, and it just makes you scratch your head.
Yeah.
If he was having that kind of success as a stand-up comedian, what would make him, want to end it all? When people wind up ending it all, it's not the same story.
No.
Every single story is a different story, and it makes you scratch your head and try to find some kind of logic, because obviously he was having success as a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Why not go back to stand-up?
Yeah, well, I think
I don't understand. I just don't understand. But then again, I wasn't him. I wasn't walking in his shoes. I have no idea what was going on in his life.
Well,
I know that from what I read, his life was going down a
downward spiral.
Pretty big downward spiral, and the only thing I can think of is maybe there's something more insidious. Maybe he had a drug problem or something.
Well, I can fill in some of those holes and kind of tell you what went on. But before I do, Gar, but the thing with that is, let's talk about this. I mean, okay, the lovable Richard Dawson was the original host of Family Feud. So I think at that point, whoever's going to be the next guy in line to think that they're going to be as popular as Richard Dawson. I mean, those are some big shoes to fill, if you know what I mean. And so I think, Ray Combs almost would have been better off if he had, after he got that kind of, standing ovation on The Tonight Show, if he would have gone and tried to create a show of his own or something. But then again, when you get something like that offered, who would turn it down? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, who would turn it down? But man, it's just, there's sometimes when it's just not a good decision to follow up somebody like that, because it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and now
this is one of those cases. Richard Dawson was just he cast too large of a shadow.
Yeah, and now I can tell you what kind of started the downward spiral for Ray Combs. It said in July of 1994, Combs was involved in a serious car accident that took place along the Ventura Freeway. Ray Combs was injured in the accident, leaving one of his spinal discs in extreme continuous pain. Following the car accident, Combs remained in constant pain from his injuries. He began to have serious financial problems, and his life continued in a downward spiral, as we said, which included a divorce from his wife Debbie of 18 years, who he had 6 children with. So again, you get fired from the Family Feud, you get in this serious car accident, you sustain serious injuries,
pain.
And when you're in that kind of pain, a lot of people, unfortunately, they start thinking like that. Oh, I'd be better off if I, were to just. And then your marriage of 18 years, your wife who you have 6 kids with.
Well, but then also, during that time period, doctors were, prescribing opiates like candy. And so I would not be surprised if doctors were prescribing him, some pretty hefty
prescriptions,
painkillers, which in turn, when you're having, that kind of pain, constant pain, you're going to wind up getting addicted to those opiates, and prescription opiates are some of the most difficult things to try to become unaddicted to.
And part of the reason is
addicted to prescription opiates. It's like way harder to get unaddicted to. It's harder than breaking free from alcohol.
Yeah, because a lot of those pain medications, they really numb the pain. A lot of those medications you're talking about, they really numb the pain, so you think it's really taking away the pain. And then
of course, everybody's thinking, well, it's prescription. So
yeah. And,
well, no, it's not okay.
Yeah, and so Gar, to just kind of tell you how his life kind of finally came crumbling to an awful sad end. It said on June 1st, 1996, police were called to the home of Ray Combs in Glendale, California, and reports of a disturbance. Combs had destroyed most of the inside of his house. had been banging his head against the wall, just in a very poor mental state, and it said once the police arrived to the house, Combs' estranged wife Debbie reported to the police that Combs was suicidal and had just spent the previous week in the hospital for a suicide attempt. The police then took Combs back to the hospital where he was placed on a 72-hour suicide watch, but sadly, a hospital worker found Combs hanging by a bedsheet in his room, and you know the rest.
Yeah, it's a pretty dark story, and I just remember when it all happened. It was really
a sad ending.
Shocking.
Yeah, and he was.
It really was shocking because I think I was like everybody else. I was really not aware
of his problems.
Of his problems and everything, and then when it wound up getting announced.
On the news,
that he had, wound up committing suicide. Everybody was scratching their head because, the last thing you would think of back then when a game show host committing suicide.
Yeah, and part of that is.
It's just like you just don't hear of that.
And the part of it is if you ever did see an episode of Family Feud with Ray Combs hosting, he was like. You often hear people say comedians are some of the saddest people. They spend their whole life making other people laugh, where a lot of times they tell these jokes kind of to hide their pain. I mean, and if you ever watched an old episode of Family Feud where Ray Combs was hosting, he came across as very kind of likable. He seemed to always be laughing. But again, in retrospect, you look at that now and you may think, okay, that may have been a mask. But I imagine during the time he was doing the Family Feud, that was maybe one of the most happiest times of his life. He maybe was enjoying it. And here's the thing, though. When he got fired from the show, you never heard the name Ray Combs anymore. And then we really didn't hear about him until his tragic suicide. And it's one of those cautionary tales, and that could have played a role in it as well,
Well, they also made, the producers of Family Feud somehow they made the mistake of letting it out that he was going to be let go.
Yeah.
And so the last 2 weeks of his tenure on the show, he just completely didn't even care anymore.
Yeah, why would you?
He was just being rude to the contestants. And so it just, that last 2 weeks was real
hard.
it was hard on everyone.
Yeah. And
you know what I mean?
Now, Gar, let's pick it up a little here, because once he was kind of dismissed, of course the producers decided, okay, who are we going to get to replace Ray Combs? And Mark Goodson made the ultimate decision. You know what? Why don't we go back to the host who was the most popular? He was the original host. Let's call Richard Dawson, and he's going to come back. But ultimately, he came back for just one season.
Well, and I remember, when he came back. Mm-hmm. And I also remember the first thing that everybody said when he came back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is he going to do the kiss?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's the honest to God truth. That is the first thing that everybody was saying when he came back to the show. Is he going to do the kiss? Because it was always this kind of thing that, everybody, he was doing it. He got the producers were allowing it.
He got away with it.
But when you're watching it at home, you could, when I was watching it, I felt uncomfortable.
And here's the crazy thing. It was weird.
I could see it. And I couldn't really put my thumb on it at the time. I wasn't really aware of what was going on. All I just knew was that, him doing the kiss made me feel uncomfortable.
And
And so, honestly, he says that he did it because he made a promise to his daughter that he wasn't going to, the only person he was ever going to smooch with was mommy and all that kind of stuff. but I don't buy it.
And here's the thing with that, Gar.
Honestly, I think he knew, that whole acceptance for what he was doing was now starting to become unacceptable. So he made the decision. Well, let's just do it without the kiss.
Yeah, I mean,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I think there's a huge aspect. If you look at like when Ray Combs hosted the show, they did not do any of that kissing stuff, and I think there's a huge reason why too. Because could you imagine Ray Combs going on and doing that? They're going, oh, you're stealing what Dawson, you're stealing what Dawson did. So I could see when he came back why people would ask that, because they're like, okay, that's what he was famous for, and like it or not, even all these years later, when you talk about Richard Dawson on the Family Feud, we're still talking about right here, and it's what he was known for.
Yeah, he cast that big of a shadow,
Yeah.
and the only host that that has had that same kind of it factor.
Steve Harvey.
Steve Harvey. I've never really been because there's certain comedy that appeals to me, and there's certain comedy that not my cup of tea, and
like
I never really got Steve Harvey's that whole thing. Whenever I saw him being the guest the host of this or the host of that, he was okay and everything. I get a couple of chuckles, but I wasn't really, wow, that guy's hilarious.
The Family Feud, though, he's made a name.
I started watching these episodes, preparing for this Time Machine episode. Steve Harvey's got it, man.
And
I'm telling you, anybody that wants to watch something that's funny, his ad libs are priceless, and he really doubles up on the comedy. You have now the hilarity of the answer by the guest, but you have his reaction, which is also just as funny.
And I think
and it's a great combination. It really, I haven't laughed like that in a long time. His reactions are hilarious, and I get it. I get it, and I like it. And
his reactions that you're talking about, part of those reactions have to do with the facial expression that he makes alone. I mean, and it seems to be...
Or even a head shake. Sometimes he does a head shake, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it just embellishes on the laughter.
And the proof is in the pudding, because I was reading that... in all the years of the Family Feud, I mean, Richard Dawson, like you said, he's recorded the most episodes. But Steve Harvey has now been the host that's had the gig the longest, and once he took over, the ratings actually shot back up, and they've remained. The shows remain very popular. The ratings continue to be pretty steady and pretty popular. That's why the show is continuing to be on the air all these years. And what's amazing is they show old reruns on the Game Show Network. You can go online, as you discovered. What I discovered, I didn't even know. I'm gonna have to go check this out later. And prepping for a show today, I was still looking stuff on the Family Feud this morning. You can go online, and they got where you can play like online versions of the Family Feud. I'm going to have to look into that. But they've had like a total of 6 hosts. I don't know if you're aware of that. Obviously, we talked about Richard Dawson, the original host, Ray Combs, who replaced him, Steve Harvey. But in between, you had Louis Anderson. You had Richard Kern, who played Al on Home Improvement. You may remember him from that. And they had John O'Hurley from Seinfeld. But none of those other comedians, I think, had that it factor. I mean, I think Louis Anderson's a funny guy, but Family Feud just was not the vehicle for him. He is sadly passed on.
You got it. You just hit it on the head of the nail.
Yeah.
The other ones, their approach was just like every other game show.
Kind of bland. Nothing. They didn't have that extra.
Yes, and that's so true. That is that difference between it's not just the difference between the actual game show, because the star of the show is the crazy answer,
the master of the ceremonies.
But you double up on it with the reaction of the hosts.
Yeah.
And that's the magical recipe of that show right there is the crazy unpredictable answers and the crazy unpredictable reactions, and and it's just a great combination. But you take any other game show, and they don't have that recipe. They don't have the reactions of the host.
Yeah.
It's much more bland,
yeah.
you know, and it's really more about just exercising your brain.
Yeah.
Family Feud just had that super sauce.
Yeah, and anybody who's going to host a Family Feud, not only do you have to have that it factor, but you got to be really funny. You got to have great comedic timing, and like you take somebody like John Hurley. Okay, the character he played on Seinfeld was kind of bland. You know, he talked like this, and on Family Feud, he kind of, I don't know if they thought, okay, well, he had a successful character on Seinfeld, so we're going to have him act the same way on this show. It just did not work for the Family Feud. And because,
no, it didn't.
And what's interesting is, before we wrap this update, I should mention, like I said, Family Feud predate great shows like, the Pyramid with Dick Clark, the Wheel of Fortune.
$20,000 pyramid.
That's it. And Wheel of Fortune.
Understand, $20,000 back then was a crap load of money.
Yeah, and Jeopardy. But once those shows came on, that's when Family Feuds, for the very first time, started losing ratings because they had these other game shows to compete with. And if you remember, in the 80s in particular, every major network had like a classic game show. So you had all these shows all of a sudden that you didn't have to previously compete with. And I was reading that, kind of just to, again, wrap this up, it said that apparently, I could not find any episodes of A Tonight Show, but apparently in the 70s, Richard Dawson made many appearances hosting Tonight Show, and back as early as 1980, Johnny Carson was seriously considering to leave The Tonight Show, and he originally was planning to name Richard Dawson as his replacement, but Johnny ended up staying until 1992. But again, can you imagine? I mean, could you imagine Richard Dawson as the host of a Tonight Show? I don't know if I can, but again, it's all about timing, and maybe in 1980 he would have been the guy to do it. Yeah,
well, now it's all speculative now. You know, a lot of people don't know that Steve Harvey, before when he was young, before he had any inkling of being in the entertainment industry, he was in the Merchant Marines.
Yeah.
While he was out at sea, he used to make a lot of money fighting other fighter. I mean, one time, this is a long time ago, so $5,000 was a lot more money back then.
Oh, sure.
Because of inflation and everything. Now, $5,000 is still a lot of money, but way back then, $5,000 was like 4 times as much money.
And
what I mean?
And
but he one time he came back from one of his outings on the ship, and he made $5,000 fighting other, boxing and fighting other guys that were also in the Merchant Marines. So he might want to think twice about getting a fight with for Harvey, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And as far as Richard Dawson goes, people should know that he lived a pretty long life. He died at the age of 79. It said actually he died June 2nd, 2012. Died from cancer, and so that's where he is. But again, Family Feud is one of the most beloved TV game shows of all time. It's still on the air, and I'm with you, Gar. I had a lot of times I'm thinking for ideas for our show, what to do an episode on, and I happened to come across something a couple weeks back about the Family Feud, and I just started remembering what a great show it was. Like again, in prepping for a show, I was watching these old episodes. I was yelling out the answer, and I think like you, I'm going to start watching some of these old episodes online what's interesting is it has such a huge impact on pop culture that you can actually go online, like on Amazon or in some of the stores. You can buy they got Family Feud games that you can purchase, that you can play at home. So there's that out there for people to do if they want.
Well, I highly suggest anyone that's watched or listening to this this episode, if you're not as familiar with it, or you're like me, and you haven't watched it in quite a while, go on YouTube or go or Google
Family Feud.
Most funny episodes of Family Feud and watch them, because I don't know anyone that doesn't like to laugh.
Yeah, I'm with you.
You know what I mean? And if you Google, or if you go to YouTube and you look up these most funniest episodes of Family Feud, you're going to laugh. You are going to laugh hard.
Yeah.
So I suggest to anyone, if you're not familiar with the show or anything, you can start watching the show, on TV again, because Steve Harvey is doing a great job with the show. It's got legs under it, and those legs are solid. But even the older episodes, where you're watching Richard Dawson's reactions to, the answers that the contestants, give out. His reactions are hilarious too, and it's so just you don't even have to buy the whole CD set or DVD set or anything. You can just Google or YouTube and watch these, and I guarantee you will laugh.
Yeah, and that's the Family Feud is ageless. I mean, you got classic episodes with Richard Dawson, and then you got the current one with Steve Harvey, and it's just as funny. And that's kind of proof in the pudding that if you get the right guy to host the show, it can continue to be successful for, so far, 23 seasons. 2023 marks the 47th anniversary of the Family Feud. Happy anniversary, Family Feud. And the last thing I'm going to say regarding the Family Feud is, you were so right. I remember as a kid watching the show, Gar, and seeing all these people win this money and these prizes. And the hosts were and the contestants were so over the top about their winnings. They're like, oh my God, people go on I wish I could go on that show. People go on these shows and they become rich, man. They get all this money and all these wonderful prizes, but then you realize when you grow up, it wasn't that much money, but yeah, it was a nice amount,
Well, but then again, when you're talking about like the 70s or the 80s, this will give you kind of a way to mentally measure inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1991. When I first started working for this major musical instrument company, and I was, selling musical instruments, a Fender Stratocaster, an American Standard Stratocaster, which is the iconic
guitar
Stratocaster that has been famous by Fender all these years.
Yeah.
You go all the way back to 1954 when the first Stratocaster was ever made. It is that all American standards are based on that guitar.
There you go.
And then nowadays they have many, many different lines of the American Standard Strat. But, they have the one that's made in Japan.
Yeah.
And then they have the ones that are made in Indonesia and Korea and all of these other places. But the one that everybody is looking for is the American Standard Strat. Well, back in 1991, an American Standard Strat was selling for $600.
Woo! That was cheap. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that same guitar is selling for between $1,500 and $2,000.
Amazing. And now, Gar, before we say goodbye for today and wrap it up, I want to get people excited for our next episode, which is going to be on At the Movies with Siskel and Ebert. I tell you, those are the two most famous movie critics of all time, and there's a reason for that, and we're going to get all into that in 2 weeks from now. So you take care, Gar, and I'd like to thank you for being everybody's rock star from everybody's favorite pop culture playground. Thanks for what you do, Gar. You're the greatest co-host.
Oh my God, I would never miss this for a second.
You and me both, buddy.
This episode has been an absolute joy to do.
In fact, when I post this episode next week, and I'm going to go online and post a lot of those old episodes we were watching, so people can look and finally see exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Take care, my friend. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You too, brother.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.